Welcome to the InPowered Life Podcast,
a space dedicated to spreading the message that you have the power within to create everything you seek.
So if you're ready to enroll in a new kind of higher learning, the kind that leads to true personal freedom, hang here with us.
We're your hosts, Rudi and Aniston, and this is InPowered Life. Welcome to the InPowered Life Podcast. My name is Rudi Riekstins. I'm your host, and today we're joined by Nathan Leathers. I am so excited to have him on the show. He is an entrepreneur, real estate investor, but more than anything, he is a legacy builder. You know, we're always talking about on the InPowered Life that your life is not so much about you. Your life is about what you do with your life, and all the life experience that you've had is adding up to the person that you're going to become. This is so true because Nathan is the leading example of what does this look like to take his life, his lessons, his journey, coming from humble beginnings, building himself up to be a multi-seven-figure entrepreneur, and then turning around and not only living his highest and his greatest potential, but now turning around and teaching what has been his life. More than anything, that when you live a fulfilled life, you get to turn around and share with other people how they can do the same. And Nate is bringing people along for the ride. Nate, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the InPowered Life Podcast, brother.
I appreciate it, Rudi. Thank you. Yeah, real excited about being on today, and hopefully we can give people some different perspective on how, you know, you had mentioned about my humble beginnings. And so if you would like, I can share kind of a brief elevator pitch of what the humble beginnings looked like and how I chose to essentially break the chain while still having amazing, loving family, to really to be able to live this life. Because the more I have ability to step back and look at that and appreciate it, especially with as fast paced as my life is, it's an amazing feeling, and the amount of people that I've impacted thus far is what I truly live for at this point. So appreciate you having me on.
So you mentioned that your life is fast-paced now, and obviously your life wasn't always fast-paced. We've now twice mentioned in just the first opening minutes that you started from humble beginnings. So why don't you give us the background? What was your life like? What did it look like? But what I really would love for you to do is if you could just support us in understanding what did it feel like to be you, and how did you create that shift to get you to ultimately where you went to? Because there's so many people that are going to listen to this and they're going to, resonate with your story, with your beginning, but they also wanting to create that shift.
Sure. Yeah, without making it too much of a sales approach here, the reality is I was born into a family with very loving parents, but we were middle to low income, 800 square foot home, but they bought their first home back in the 80s and not the best part of San Diego. My father worked in Mexico at the time, and he was fixing Greyhound racetrack, like electrical boards. And, I remember still to this day, that we couldn't be out past dark, things like that. But when I was balancing their checkbook, and I don't know why this became of interest to me when I was younger, but it had maybe $100 in it, type of thing. $150, I think, is a number that always kind of triggers in my head. And I remember, I didn't know what Disneyland was until I was probably 10 or 12 years old. Our vacations were going out to the mountains and camping. One, because my parents are hippies and that's how they got here. But two, predominantly just because of the financial requirement it would to do anything else outside of camping or essentially free activities. So we were born in that environment, which is perfectly fine. Because you didn't, at that age, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so you just had loving parents. And it was, Christmases were, a single present type of thing. And mom put the bowl on the head and cut the hair and all that fun stuff. The whole story, I'm sure people have heard before. As I started getting out of grade school and went into high school, there started to be more noticeable separation in material things with friends of mine that I had versus stuff I couldn't have. And obviously I didn't have the knowledge then as I do now, and material things such as cars and nicer clothes and nicer shoes, especially in the late 80s, was a really big thing. And so I wanted some of those things, and I know I couldn't have them unless I changed the behaviors or at least the mentality of how my parents raised me. And if I wanted to do something different and essentially break the chain, I had to do that in a different way. So, I didn't know what I didn't know. So I, did all the weed pulling and got my first job when I was 15 at a convenience store. And then I started working numerous jobs while going to school all the way through college. And I just basically said, I don't want to live necessarily this life, even though my parents did the best for me from a financial standpoint. I wanted to be able to support and provide and live a different type of life than I had been raised. And so there was just a trigger in me with the people that I surrounded myself with, that basically said, you can live these ways, and obviously utilized friends, families that were quite successful, and kind of just learn from them. And I've always done that. I've made decisions based on using other people. It's probably the wrong phraseology, but guinea pigs, from not ever doing drugs to, not ever getting crazy into the party scene, and just making sure I made, the right decisions as consistently as I could. Because I think the people in which you surround yourself with and making the right decisions consistently, I think are two of the biggest components to really having some success and some momentum associated with in your younger years. And so that's the long and short of it is that those are the kind of things I utilized when I was younger, and I stayed out of trouble and had worked really, really, really hard. Even if it was going to be the best damn stock boy at Circle K I could be, I just chose to be the best at what I could do, simply because I thought that mentality would then bleed into every other aspect of my life.
So was there like a defining moment in your life where you decided that there was more for you, that you wanted to do more? I have a very specific defining moment where I saw poverty in my home. I saw an experience and I said, man, I will never, ever have that. My wife will never, ever experience that. What was that moment for you, and how did that serve as a catalyst for change?
I think it was more of an overall time period than a specific moment. Because I just kept involving myself around people that were a bit more successful, and then people that were making the wrong decisions, such as the drugs and the alcohol in high school, I stayed away from. But over high school specifically is probably a defining point of mine into the early years of college. One, because I was working and able to see how I could manage money and utilize it to live a little bit better life. But it was over that time period of high school where, I became a lot more independent. I just had a much larger lens, if you want to utilize that perspective, on what looked right and what didn't look right from my viewpoint. And I just started leaning into the right decisions, where I think high school is a critical phase for obviously anybody of that age to really kind of be around the right people, but concurrently you're starting to kind of evolve as an adult to some level, where you're not going to be relying on your parents as much. And so it wasn't a specific moment, more than numerous moments where you found friends that made the wrong decisions, and so you separated, and the ones that continue to make the right decisions started having a little bit better life, right? And that still kind of bleeds into today, and it's just reinforced by the day in and day of. I unfortunately had a person that I hung out with really closely in high school, and then right as I got out of high school, and he got into drugs, and we were really, hung out every single night, racing cars and all that stuff, doing all the stupid kid stuff, but. And just last year he died from epilepsy, or a couple years ago now, and more than likely was from the past use of abundance of drugs, right? And so it just reinforces those specific decisions that are kind of defining points of your life, where I could have leaned into his friend group and probably been in a completely different position than I am today. But I just used a number of those types of environments where, if drugs were at a party or an event I was at, I just chose not to use them where other people did. And I can't tell you exactly why I made those decisions, other than that just seemed to be the right decision at the time, which obviously is led well for me to where I'm sitting today.
So having gone through that experience, which wasn't just one moment, as you mentioned, it was making these compounded decisions again and again and again to put yourself in the right circles. And not everyone's going to find themselves in high school listening to this, or in college, or hanging out with friends that are doing drugs. But we are talking about the 5 people you spend the most time with. And so if somebody's listening to the show right now and they're wanting to create a change in their life, what would be your advice about looking at who their friends are and the decisions that they're making around where they want to go and what they want to do?
That's probably one of the biggest thing that I've talked about. And I'm even going through that right now, to be frank with you, because as I continue to elevate myself from a success standpoint, at least financially, but even when it comes to involving these types of discussions, there's different chapters in a book, right? And certain friends are going to be in every single chapter, and there's certain ones that chapter's closed and you move on. And I think a lot of people, there's going to be a lot of people that disagree with this viewpoint too. But I think this can also unfortunately apply to family at times, right? There's certain family members that can have the wrong decisions, and and you can only do so much for them. But people need to understand that there's a couple billion people on this earth, and although they've had a friend since they're 10 years old, doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have to be friends with them, but that inherently might turn into more of an acquaintance because you've just kind of separated yourself in spiritually, personally, or professionally. And you have to be able to say, okay, well, what does my life look like? What do I want it to look like? And that goes into that, the infinite / finite game mentality, which we can talk about later, which obviously numerous different people have talked about. We use our own type of mentality on that, but based on how you want your life to look when you're 40, 50, 60, 70 years old, and even your golden years, it has to define who you surround yourself with. So if you want the yacht or the fast cars or the big homes, then clearly if you're hanging around people that are 9-to-5ers doing, that just want to work till they're 65 years old, that's not going to drive that behavior within you. And it's a hard decision. You got to have definitely a lot of self, reflection to say and make the tough decision. These decisions that I've had weren't always easy, right? Especially when you have, in high school, the drugs or alcohol, that looked like a lot of fun, but I also knew the other side of it was the downside was significantly worse, right? And so through high school and college, I mean, our wedding, me and my wife talk about this all the time, but our wedding is probably, and this isn't because we don't like the people that went to our wedding anymore, but we're probably 80% different than it would be today as it would be 15 years ago. And it's predominantly just because of the evolution of our lives. And, we continue to try to elevate ourselves. And so is it easy to sit there and say you don't want to, that you don't hang out as much with a person that you've known since third grade? No, that's not an easy decision. And you feel a certain way about that. But you also have to say that person's choosing to live a certain life. And the life I want to live is simply different than that. So I have to then surround myself around other people. And that's an actual person that I'm referring to in my life. It's not that I don't like this individual. In fact, I like him a lot. But when it comes to the support and the desire and the way he wants to live his life is just drastically different than I want to live mine. So because of that, there's not a lot of synergy there any longer. And you just have to make the tough decision, which is to, and it doesn't happen overnight. You don't just cut them off. You just start hanging out with different people. And those people tend to fit your lifestyle a little bit better. And so because of that, and time being the most scarce resource we have, that person that you've known since third grade, you don't have as much availability for him or her. Right. And so that's what I've had to do, is make a lot of those tough decisions. And you just kind of say, sorry, I just don't have the time to do this with you right now. I have this and this and this going on.
So many people want to have a different life. They want to create a change, but they're not doing what we're talking about right now. And
Sure.
I would like to just stay on this just for a moment longer, because I think there's so much value in people having the understanding of looking at your surroundings. How are you spending your time? What is the information that you're collecting from the conversations that you're having? Are people stretching your mind or your awareness to what is possible? You just mentioned yachts and planes. For some people, it might just be an RV and, a paid vacation for 2 weeks without going into debt. And so if we want to create shifts, how are we making those changes and looking at who you spend your most time with and where you're drawing your inspiration from is definitely going to be that. We mention this all the time, that there are coaching circles where people will spend 10, 20, 50, 100, $150,000 a year to put them into another coaching circle, another friend group, another level of awareness. Because if your aspirations to get to $1 million, hang out with people that are making millions. If you want to get to, I want to say 9-figure status, you've got to start hanging out with people that are in that league or that level, because they're going to change how you think or change how you feel. But guilt and shame is always going to come in. We're going to feel guilty that we have to carry people forward. And so thank you for candidly and honestly sharing, obviously, that as we grow and as we change, we need to make those shifts and changes in our life and in our awareness. You mentioned a moment ago, that you and your wife would hang out with very different people today, or your wedding circle would be very different today versus what it was then. And so you're constantly in a state of evolving and growing and changing. What does it look like to be married 15 years? You have a 5-year-old daughter, you have a thriving life, thriving business, but you also seem to have a thriving relationship. Is it important to you that, your partner is involved in what it is that you're doing from an investment perspective, from a business perspective, or do you keep those separate?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, Rudi. This is actually something I'm really passionate about. I'll actually kind of change the tone here and be a little bit pessimistic in a good way. And what I mean by that is I've had to try to find different channels to get to the 9 and 10 figure people, to elevate myself too. So I've recently joined different groups to do that. One of the groups I've joined a few years back is Vistage, which is a CEO based group. Without naming any specific names, one of the things that I've noticed that have become very challenging for people that have relationships that are, millionaires or greater, is their ability to communicate with their partner. And not that, I know we're on an audio podcast here, but if you think that one person's flying a plane at 10,000 feet and the other one's flying at 5,000 feet, they're never going to connect with each other because they're on different wavelengths when it comes to the expectations and the future vision of what their lives look like. And I think a lot of relationships, and it's weird to me because it doesn't even equate to me in my brain that that's an option. There's, for example, one of the ones that was in my group, great guy, CEO of a big brewery, et cetera, a really cool guy, but his wife's complaining about how the house is too big and she's bored. Right. And I can tell you 10 or 15 different stories of like that over the years with this specific group Vistage, where they're hyper successful, but the identity within that each respective partnership isn't tied into each other and they're not symbiotic. Right. So the husband just keeps specifying that he predominantly the men in this group, that it's all about the money and the next thing. And the wife's like, no, I want more time. And they just can't find a common ground when it comes to that. And so to bring it to a more positive note, because I've seen that this is a perfect example, but I use that person as a guinea pig, or people like this as guinea pigs, which again, it's probably the wrong use of word there, but similar to like I did in high school, I said, I'm not going to live that life. That looks not good. That is not a good situation. It looks very unhappy and just not the right decision. So I spent years with my wife talking to her about what our lives look like. If she's okay with, how social I am and I'm out 3 or 4 or 5 nights a week. Are you okay with these investments, these houses we're purchasing? Are you okay with the time I'm spending with Peyton? Do I feel like I'm okay with how much time I'm spending with Peyton? And we just over communicate those things. And you have to have somebody that supports that vision too, right? Because you're not always going to have a power couple in a scenario. That's definitely not us. My wife is introverted, and she does not, and we have very clear delineation of roles relative to our relationship, and she's okay with that. Should I recognize her more for it sometimes? Yeah, and I also recognize I don't do a good job, but that's one of my shortcomings, to be frank. But then at times when I take a step back and do that, I then have to, at least intimately with her, say, hey, I really appreciate you kind of falling back and taking this role to support our life, and we live an amazing life. But because we talk a lot about that, and we're very open about it, I think it's been incredibly helpful in our relationship. One of the things from a material standpoint we talked about is owning a home on the water for years. We knew we didn't want to buy one in California predominantly just because of the financial requirement of it, but also because we really enjoy Mexico and its culture. And so for 3 or 4 or 5 years in a row, we'd go down to Cabo or different places and just window shop, having no business. We did not have the money to buy this home, but we said, this is why we're working so hard. This is one of the reasons we're working really hard. We're continuing to do this. And then finally, about 2 years ago, bought a house cash in Rosarito on the water, beautiful place. But we basically created, a vision of that for years. And we've done that numerous times with different material things or things to just, make her really happy. We did that in our Lake Havasu home. And now when she goes there, she's the most relaxed person possible. And it makes her very happy to be in an environment like that. Right. But because we're over communicating that vision so we can fly at the same altitude together as a team versus just assuming they know what they want, is what's made it quite successful for us. And listen, we have our challenges like any couples do at 15 years, but I can tell you that we communicate pretty well with that. And I'm incredibly happy with how we're sitting. Right. And I have to give a lot of that to my parents. They just hit their 50th year anniversary this week. In fact, we're taking them on a helicopter ride for a sunset tomorrow night as a congratulations. It's an incredible feat. And then her parents are, 35 plus years. So we have a very good platform to grow off of when it comes to relationships, for sure.
That's incredible. And congratulations to your parents. My mom and dad were just out here, and my brothers and all their relative partners and spouses were out here to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary and my mom's 75th birthday. So I can totally relate. Totally. I wanted to touch on something. You mentioned a moment ago, identity. And identity is something that I don't think enough people talk about, and we most certainly haven't touched on it enough on this platform, because everybody has identified with themselves at a certain level, and then they think that they want something because they identified that they're going to become something when they get to that level. But we don't often evolve that identity as we continue to grow. 15 years ago when you met your wife, you didn't have the resources that you guys have today. And so your identity has shifted and changed. Your relationship identity has shifted and changed. And then obviously for you to be able to go from a multi-7-figure entrepreneur to eventually moving into a 8 and 9 and then 10-figure entrepreneur, which is where you're headed. My question really is, how important is it to shift your identity as you're shifting and changing your awareness? I want to give our audience a little color, because I know some of your backstory. You built a really successful company, then you sold your business. Your identity was, I'm a business owner, I am successful, I am thriving, I am these things. And then you sell it, and then you start another business, and then you go into investments. And so you've got all these different areas where you have different identities in each one of them. And I think there could be tremendous value in unpacking that on the podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I don't know if I do, and again, it's a choice of phraseology, right? But I don't truly feel that my identity is a business person. I think it's a chapter of my life that could be, a fraction of my identity, because I look at things, we were talking about this. Everybody knows who Simon Sinek is, and he uses a term called finite versus infinite games. You and I talked about that off camera and audio. The real person that actually started that was James Carse, which is who Simon took it from in the 80s. And so my identity, especially in the last number of years since I've really opened my mind up to perspective on this, and I'm very blessed to have a very, very close friend of mine, Dakota, kind of challenge me on this, is when you make millions of dollars and you sell this business, who are you? Right. And he challenged me 5 or 6 years ago on this, and it really shook my brain, for lack of a better term. And I really identify myself around the infinite game, not the business. I don't want to be known as the guy that sold Green Guard for millions of dollars, or the pilot, right? I want to do it based on an overall identity. And I think people struggle, women specifically can do this too, and men definitely from a financial standpoint. Women, as far as if they're a mom and then their kid, flies the nest as they get to 16, 17, 18 years old, women then can really, really struggle with who they are, especially if they don't have a strong relationship with their, another person, a husband or whoever it is. Right. And so I think that's very, very dangerous if you're basically wrapping your identity around finite games, because when does it end? Finite game, by the definition of Simon or James Carse, is basically a game with a means to an end, a basketball game, buying a house, buying a car, having and some would argue that being a parent is a clearly not a finite game, but it is in some capacity, because the kids aren't going to need you at a certain point as much or at all, right, from a day-to-day basis. And so there's some identity loss there, right? And so when I sold Green Guard, I had to really challenge myself a year or so before, when I knew I was going to do it, on what my life looked like, and it can't be surrounded around being a multimillionaire, because then what? And then that extremism complex, you make a bunch of money and then you start doing these additional things, and it can become quite dangerous. And so I didn't want to go down that path. And so I looked at what the infinite game is, and we looked at the infinite game, and then myself and Dakota then looked at a guy, David Orr, who did something called your head, your heart, and your hand, which has also been used by a few other people, but he used in the 90s is the farthest back we can date that. And the way we define your head, heart, and your hand from an infinite game standpoint, and by the way, we define an infinite game is a game with you play for the sake of gameplay. There's no ending to it. You just play it for the sake of gameplay, and do it for complete passion and happiness, which is at the end of the day what we want, right? And your head is what you continue to do to educate yourself. So my identity is around longevity, and there's some childhood trauma associated with that, with health issues with my mother and my wife's parents. So I really want to understand longevity, and I want to understand leadership, and really elevate people and break through their ceilings. Those are things I really want to continue to educate myself with, i.e. my head. Your heart is your soul family, or who you truly want to surround yourself with, to share that knowledge. And then your hand is your helping hand to society. The key to that, the big asterisk is the helping hand with asking for nothing in return. The second you ask for something in return, it becomes transactional, which then becomes finite, right? That doesn't mean that if you can define your head, heart, and your hand, and my hand is helping the youth. I love doing public speaking. I also want to educate people on longevity, and then we also want to own a no-kill dog shelter and rehabilitate people that have been in prison or been imprisoned, and also rehabilitate animals, obviously, at the same time. And so, and I could, as of it sits today, and this doesn't mean this isn't evolutionized, but those things I can see myself doing in my 70s or 80s or beyond. Right now, that could change, but there's no ending in those games for me, or those infinite games. And I think that's, to me, in my perspective, how people should be defining their identity. And if I could challenge the listeners to this, and this is just a fake number, so whatever number you want to use. If I give you, $10 million to $100 million today, what would you do with your life? And there's 3 rules to the game. 1, you can't say travel because you're not going to travel 24/7. 2, you're not going to say spend time with family, although we love family. You're not going to want to spend 24/7 with them doing it. And 3, you can't say invest it because you have more money than you know what to do with. So then what does your life look like? Right? And maybe you define it through the lens of the head, heart, and hand, or some kind perspective. And so that's where truly, Rudi, I gain where I think my identity lies, is the legacy in which I leave, based on the impact I can leave on others through longevity, and these few other things I just talked about. And you got to be very, very specific when you want to define your infinite game. You can't say helping people because it's too generic. So when you get to that point, you helping people, do you really have a very micro level based plan on how that looks, so you can be very, very excited and compassionate about it? Or, you say helping people, there's a million ways of doing that, and you could just kind of be lost in oblivion, suggesting that type of mentality versus, I'm going to go to colleges, I'm going to speak to these students, I want them to really understand what this looks like and what their lives can be, and the opportunity they have if they just think slightly different. And so that's how my identity is wrapped around it. Now, to kind of long-winded answer your question, that doesn't mean you don't have some level of identity as a business person when you own a business. Clearly you do, right? You almost could use the phrase of it's an identity around your finite game that you have to play to get to your infinite game, which is your ultimate identity. Maybe that's one way of looking at it. And so that's my perspective on that. And clearly you got to be fully engaged in these finite games to get to the infinite game as soon as possible, so you can just truly find your a deep passion and fulfillment. And at the end of the day, all we want to do is just be happy and leave a legacy, which I think at a very basic level, very few would argue.
So we started the episode intentionally saying that, when we learn anything in life, as we navigate our journey, that life isn't so much about us, it's about what we do with our life. So when we turn around and we teach it. And I wanted to ask these questions because I know that so many people are aspiring to make money, and they feel that they have an identity, or at least a belief in an identity of who they're going to be when they're worth millions. And when they've got millions, then they will have all this, then they can do all these things. And what I love so much about your story is that when you've achieved a tremendous amount of wealth, and you can now turn around and say, well, I'm good now. I don't have to work. I don't have to do anything. I can just enjoy my life. That now you're turning around and wanting to be able to create an impact with what has been your life, and sharing the knowledge of how you grew up, or what was your journey, or what was the mindset that you were able to create the shift. Talking about your finite game and looking at the identities as it relates to that. I have an identity as it relates to being a father to my son. I have another identity as it relates to being a father to my daughter. I'm a different father to each of them because they need different things. I have that identity around what it is with my wife and my family unit, and then in life and in business. But we're not the same person in every single room, in every single interaction. And therefore we shouldn't be beholden to the same thoughts, feelings, and decisions in every one of those interactions. And I think that's what really defines people that achieve great success. And they're knowing that as that relationship grows and as your environment changes, that identity with who you were needs to also change so you can be who you want to become. My daughter doesn't need me the same way today at 9 years old as she did when she was 6. It's a different relationship now, and it's going to continue to grow and evolve. But if I keep wanting to be the way that she needed me at 6, then, we're going to have a stagnant relationship. And I think that that's so important, that the term identity is more fluid than it is this fixed thing. But if we were to start off every single day asking ourselves, who are we going to be today? And then how are we investing our time, effort, and energy into what are we playing, and categorize it into, those two categories. Are we playing the long-term game, or are we playing the short-term game? And how many of the short-term games do we need to play that lead us into the long-term game? And then bringing it back to what is the identity we're going to have in each of those. I think it's such a beautiful share, and I appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, that's very well put. I appreciate the synopsis there. You're so good with words, Rudi, which I appreciate when I first met you. And I think it's critically important there's that short-term game, i.e. the finite game. It doesn't, when I say get through those as quickly as possible, I want to suggest to the listeners, that doesn't mean you don't want to enjoy the process. Don't forget to enjoy the journey, right? Because it's part of your story and what can motivate people. But it ultimately, one of our biggest finite games in our life is working, right? And for most people, especially if they start thinking differently, I don't know if working in a profession, especially the people that are 9 to 5 and then working for corporate America, would define that as their ultimate passion. It gives me ultimate happiness, right? And so I think you got to continue to understand that objectively, is that getting you to where you need to be? And if it doesn't, you got to start thinking differently and surround yourself with around the right people to be able to have that level of vision. And it's, listen, when you're working paycheck to paycheck, because I was for a period of time, it's easier said than done. People could say there's this guy on here that made millions of dollars, and it's easy for him to say, but and maybe some people would say that during this, which is perfectly okay. What I would ask for those people that's what's going through their mind is, remember, I was working at Circle K because my parents couldn't afford new shoes for me. They bought them at a garage sale every time, or my mom gave me haircuts, right? So the point of it is I had to make a decision to surround myself around people, continue to make those right decisions and versus the wrong ones when it came specifically younger and or professionally, saying, I don't want to be that 60-year-old sales rep, which I was in sales for a long time, and I have to do something different, which is why I decided to take the leap as an entrepreneur. And then just trust yourself in your decisions. And as you continue to make those right decisions, and most of the decisions, when I say right, are mostly logical. They're not going to, these aren't decisions where somebody should ask, well, what's the right decision versus wrong one? Most of them are, pretty practical and logical. If you continue to make those decisions, then it's, you'll start gaining that confidence as an individual to then just trust yourself even more, to a point where even if you have some level of failure, you know how to get out of it and continue to grow as a human. And so hopefully people that are listening to this understand that it's never too late to do that either, right? I got a couple of friends that are in their 40s doing that right now and have become multimillionaires in just a few years. This day and age, it's so easy to find avenues to make money the right way because of the world we live in. A lot of it has to do with just, again, being predicated on who you're surrounding yourself with, and being in areas both from a geography standpoint and the type of things you're involved with that will drive that type of behavior and the people you surround yourself with. So it's an amazing world that we live in right now, although we have so much uncertainty with, especially in America politically. If you put that aside, because again, a lot of that doesn't affect us directly unless we allow it to. I think there's an incredible way to connect with people these days. And if you're utilizing the right tools, really anything is possible. I mean, the people that I surround myself with now, the stories I'm hearing, it's just, it's mind-boggling how easy it is to connect to people, both successfully and with the use of tools like social media and all that to do so. I think I would just challenge people to get outside their comfort zone and do that.
That was just probably the greatest advice, because there were a bunch of nuggets that were included in there, and I want to just go through them methodically out of memory as best I can. Get out of your comfort zone, because when you connect with people that have done other things, you just referenced it now, people have told you so many stories, and through hearing someone's story, you believe, wow, if I do that, I could achieve that. Or it opens your awareness to something else is possible. And anyone that has ever done anything and they turn around and share it and teach it, which is what you're doing with your life now, is supporting other people to be able to achieve the same and being able to do it in a shorter amount of time. You also have beautifully mentioned that we get to make decisions all day, every single day, and we don't always know what's the right decision. But if we're making a decision and it drives a result or a behavior that's not serving us, that's okay. We learned something in the process. We now just get to ask, if I was going to do that again or be in a similar situation, would I make the same decision again, or would I do something slightly differently? And it's in compounding those positive decisions each time that begin the shift of moving us from, am I going to work at the Circle K the rest of my life? Am I going to, have $150 at the end of the month as I balance my checkbook? Or am I going to make decisions that are going to move me to financial freedom? And that is what you've done, is compounded decisions again and again and again, which you again still continue to do, because you're not complacent in saying, I sold my business and I've made money. Now it's about, how do I get into the next circle, the bigger pond, so I can create greater levels of wealth, which is so beautiful. For people that are listening to this episode today, I want you to really challenge, what is your identity of how it is that you're showing up in each room that you're in? What is the identity? And are you fixed to that identity, or are you open to the possibility of it changing? I also want to remind you that everything that you want to have, be, do, and or achieve is going to be tied to you doing something you've never done. So you're going to have to put yourself in circles where you've never been. You're going to have conversations you never had. You're going to have to do actions, physical steps that you've never done before in order to achieve something that is in your future that you haven't yet achieved. Nathan, anything that you would like to say to our audience before we bring the episode to a close today?
No, I would want to just reinforce what you just said there. I have a really hard time getting uncomfortable these days, Rudi, just because I've done so much to do that. It's been a purposeful function of my life the last 5 to 10 years. But I still think there's always ways of doing that. One of the things I've recently done is taken up learning how to fly a helicopter. Yesterday, as early as yesterday, I was practicing trying to hover a helicopter, and it got really squirrely a couple times, and I got extremely uncomfortable, right? Luckily, I'm with the CFI, but I would challenge people to be uncomfortable. This sounds really silly, and I'm sure you guys have heard this, but like, even if it's something as simple as laying down for 5 seconds in the middle of a restaurant and then getting back up, people are going to look at you and be, what in the hell is this person doing? But the reality is just starting with something small to get yourself uncomfortable so you can get used to it is an incredibly powerful tool to start gaining confidence. And what you were just saying, Rudi, is momentum is everything in life, making the right decision and trusting yourself. And it's really hard to stop momentum. I can tell you my life is exponentially got better over the last 3 to 4 years simply because of this momentum that I'm not going to stop it, because I'm continuing to do the things I'm doing. It's very powerful, which is why I'm challenging myself in a multitude of different ways to, one, get uncomfortable, but two, continue to see to what level I want to get to. And so I would challenge people listening to this to surround yourself by the right people, start making the right decisions, and get uncomfortable. And you do some of those 3 things for 3 to 6 months, and your life will functionally change forever. I promise you. But you have to be consistent with it, and you have to trust yourself that it'll work out.
Beautifully, beautifully said. Where can people find you? And if somebody wanted to work with you, what would be the best place for them to connect?
Yeah, the best way right now is Instagram at Nate Leathers, and leather with 2 S's. I'm also on LinkedIn if you choose to do that for Nate Leathers, and those are probably the 2 best to communicate with me as it is today.
Well, I appreciate.
And if you want to work with me, no
Go
problem.
ahead.
Go ahead. I said if you want, and if people are interested in working with me, I do some coaching, both business and personal. And then if people want to learn a little bit more about real estate or anything like that, that's been a big part of my life, and all that will be communicated via Instagram. And I'm very active on that. It's me responding to it too, by the way, not some manager. So you'll be able to get a hold of me, and would love to chat. Thanks again for having me, Rudi.
No, thank you so much. And I apologize for interjecting. I was just going to add that, I obviously have an in as you're supporting somebody that is near and dear to me from a coaching perspective in growing and supporting and developing their business. And the way that people describe you and how you show up is somebody who gives more than what he's taking. And it was what you said in the very beginning, that you're wanting to be able to leave an impact, to change somebody's life, to change the way that they're thinking. And it's not about the dollar value, but it's about the value that you're leaving behind rather than what it is you're taking out of the room. And that's a beautiful example for everybody. So Nate, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to put all of your links into the show notes. And again, for anybody who is interested in following Nate, I highly recommend it. And for coming up onto the show, more than anything, thank you for your time. Time is by far our most invaluable resource. To our audience listening, man, I freaking love you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for investing in you. And please tag us on Instagram. Share the episode with anybody that you think would resonate with the message that we've heard today. And I would love to hear from you. What was your biggest takeaway from today's episode? Until the next time, we'll see you again. Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. And we would love your support in leaving us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Make sure to check the show notes for more information on how you can find us online and on Instagram. Now go create an amazing day for yourself, and we'll see you again soon.